5 ruthless outlaws walked into the Silver Peak Saloon looking for trouble, but they found something far deadlier instead. What started as simple intimidation would unravel a web of corruption stretching from Mexico to Canada, exposing a criminal empire built on blood money and stolen bounties. They thought they were threatening an ordinary saloonmaid, but they'd just challenged Katherine "Ghost" Morgan, the most feared bounty hunter in the American West, with 73 of the continent's most dangerous criminals to her name. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Raindrops traced paths down the grimy windows of the Silver Peak Saloon as Katherine Morgan methodically polished glasses behind the aged oak bar. Her movements were practiced and efficient, habits forged from years of ensuring nothing would hinder the lightning-quick draw that had earned her whispered reputation across 2 countries. The evening crowd was thin, likely due to the approaching storm. A handful of regulars hunched over their poker game in the corner, while old Samuel coaxed a melancholy tune from the saloon's weathered piano. Through the rain-streaked glass, Katherine watched Sheriff Clayton make his evening rounds, carefully avoiding any glance toward the saloon. Another sign that something wasn't right with local law enforcement. 2 months she'd been here in Silver Peak, watching and waiting. 2 months of gathering information about the strange happenings in this bustling Montana mining town. Missing stagecoaches, vanishing bounty hunters, and a peculiar pattern of criminals being broken out of jail just before their transfers to federal custody. Maria Delgado emerged from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. The cook had become Katherine's most trusted ally in town, her eyes and ears among the Mexican workers who saw everything but were conveniently ignored by the power brokers plotting Silver Peak's darker ventures. "More riders coming," Maria whispered in Spanish, a language few knew Katherine had mastered during her years tracking fugitives through border territories. "Black dusters, silver spurs, the Raven Gang by their colors." Katherine's hand paused, mid-polish, her keen ears catching the approaching hoofbeats. The Raven Gang, professional killers masquerading as bounty hunters. They'd been appearing more frequently in Silver Peak lately, always after high-value targets mysteriously disappeared from custody. Their reputation for brutality had cleared. Their path across 3 territories, leaving a trail of dead lawmen and vanished bounties in their wake. Most folks only whispered about them, but Katherine had crossed paths with their kind before, back when she still rode openly as the Ghost, before a bloody shootout in Dodge City had forced her to adopt this quieter life, or so everyone believed. The saloon's bat-wing doors burst open as 5 men entered, their spurs ringing against the wooden floor. Katherine recognized their leader instantly. Marcus "Blackjack" Raven, former Union Army sharpshooter turned killer for hire. His signature black duster was adorned with raven feathers, a theatrical touch that had given his gang their name. Behind him, his lieutenants spread out with military precision, Cole "Quicksilver" Martinez covering the back door, while Deadeye Dan Wilson drifted toward the stairs, cutting off any escape route. "Evening, miss," Raven drawled, sliding onto a bar stool with practiced grace. His smile never reached his cold eyes as he surveyed the saloon. "Heard tell this place serves the finest whiskey north of Denver." Katherine set down her cleaning rag, keeping her movements casual despite the tension humming through her body. "We serve whiskey," she replied evenly. "Whether it's the finest depends on the drinker's taste." Wilson snorted, moving closer to examine the gun collection mounted on the wall, vintage pieces Katherine had carefully selected to appear decorative rather than practical. His expert gaze lingered too long on certain weapons, assessing their value with professional interest. "Nice collection," he said. "Your late husband's, I assume?" "Just appreciating history," Katherine replied, noting how his hand kept straying to his holstered Colt, a custom piece with distinctive pearl grips. She'd heard stories about that gun, about how fast it could appear in Wilson's hand when trouble started. But she'd seen faster, been faster. Maria appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark eyes meeting Katherine's briefly. A silent warning passed between them. They'd witnessed this pattern before in other towns. First came the polite visits, then the questions, and finally the threats, all part of a carefully orchestrated dance that always ended in blood. "Speaking of history," Raven continued, his voice carrying that dangerous edge Katherine remembered from wanted posters that had once adorned marshals' offices across the West. "Sheriff Clayton mentioned you only acquired this place a few months back, after the unfortunate accident that befell old Tom Murphy." Katherine kept her expression neutral, even as her mind raced. Sheriff Clayton had been asking questions about her background, which meant someone was finally getting suspicious. Katherine maintained her composed demeanor while assessing Raven and his men. The saloon had grown quieter, regulars sensing the underlying tension as the Raven gang established their presence. Through the grimy windows, lightning illuminated the muddy street where more riders were arriving, wearing the same distinctive black dusters. "Tom Murphy's death was tragic," Katherine replied carefully, placing a glass of whiskey in front of Raven without being asked. A subtle reminder that she'd been reading men like him long before he'd walked through her doors. Fell down those mine-shaft stairs in the dark. "Tragic indeed," Raven's Lieutenant Martinez commented, moving closer. To the bar, his silver spurs caught the lamplight, a flash that reminded Katherine of blade steel, especially considering how many accidents seem to happen around here lately, always to folks who ask too many questions. Katherine felt Maria's warning. Presence in the kitchen doorway, the cook's hand hidden beneath her apron where Katherine knew she kept a small derringer. They'd prepared for moments like this, but the timing wasn't right, not yet. "The mining business is dangerous work," Katherine observed, noting how Raven's men had positioned themselves to cover every exit. Their movements spoke of military training, the kind that made them more dangerous than common outlaws. "Accidents happen." "Speaking of business," Raven said, producing a folded document from his duster, "I represent certain interests in this territory, legitimate businessmen who've taken notice of your establishment's strategic location." Katherine's mind raced even as she maintained her carefully crafted facade of simple saloon owner. Silver Peak sat at the crossroads of three major transit routes: stagecoaches carrying gold shipments, prison transports, and bounty hunters all passed through regularly, the perfect spot for someone monitoring or intercepting valuable cargo and prisoners. "I'm just trying to run a quiet business," she said, deliberately echoing the words of other shopkeepers who'd faced similar offers in towns across the frontier. "The Silver Peak doesn't need any partners." Raven's smile turned predatory. In these dangerous times, a woman alone might want to consider protection. The right friends can prevent all sorts of accidents. Thunder rolled outside as Katherine caught Wilson making subtle hand signals to men watching from across the street. More of the gang, establishing a perimeter. They were preparing for something bigger than simple intimidation. "Tell me, Miss Morgan," Raven continued, studying her with unsettling intensity, "have you heard any interesting stories lately? Tales of missing bounty hunters, perhaps? Criminals who seem to vanish between capture and trial?" Katherine's hand paused briefly in its methodical glass polishing, so that's what this was about. Someone had noticed her careful questions around town, her interest in the pattern of disappearances, but how much did they really suspect? "I hear lots of stories, Mr. Raven," she replied evenly, "mostly from miners who've had too much whiskey, though there was some talk about that federal marshal who disappeared last month. Chambers, I believe his name was." Martinez laughed darkly, Marshal Chambers. Now there's a cautionary tale. Man should have minded his own business instead of asking questions about things that didn't concern him. Like you've been asking. Questions, Miss Morgan. Raven's voice carried deadly emphasis on her name. My employers are curious about your sudden interest in local law enforcement matters. About your conversations with certain Mexican workers who seem to travel regularly between here and the border. Katherine met his gaze steadily, though her mind was already calculating angles, distances, mapping the positions of every weapon in the room. 7 years ago, she'd faced down the notorious Clayton brothers in a shootout that had made the Ghost a legend from Texas to Montana. But that had been an open fight. This required a more subtle touch. Your employers seem very well informed, she observed, carefully shifting her weight to ensure access to the modified holster hidden beneath her skirts. Though I wonder why they're so concerned about a simple saloon owner. Raven's hand moved to an inner pocket of his duster, producing a folded paper that made Katherine's blood run cold. A wanted poster, yellowed with age, but still clearly legible. Her own face stared back, though years younger, alongside the name that had once struck fear into the hearts of outlaws across the frontier. The Ghost. Interesting reading, Raven said softly. Especially the part about how the famous bounty hunter known as the Ghost vanished 3 years ago after a bloody shootout in Dodge City. Some say she died, others say she just disappeared. His cold smile widened. Changed. Her name, perhaps, found a quieter line of work. Katherine maintained her composed expression, though her mind raced through implications. They hadn't come here just to threaten a saloon owner. This was a test, a carefully orchestrated probe to confirm their suspicions about her true identity. Quite a story, she replied, her voice steady, though I failed to see what an old wanted poster has to do with running a saloon. Quick pause, friends. If you're enjoying this tale of hidden identities and frontier justice, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals a twist that changes everything. Lightning flashed again, closer now, illuminating the tension-filled scene. Through the windows, Katherine caught glimpses of more black-clad riders taking positions around the saloon. Whatever game Raven and his employers were playing, it was building towards something bigger than simple intimidation. The question was, how much did they really know, and what were they planning to do about it? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The storm drew closer to Silver Peak as Katherine processed the implications of Raven's revelation. The saloon had grown deathly quiet, regulars sensing the rising tension. Even old Samuel's piano had fallen silent, leaving only the growing thunder and drumming rain. That poster's quite valuable these days, Raven continued, tracing the edges of the weathered paper. The Ghost's bounties alone would be worth a fortune to anyone who could. I collect them. All those outlaws she brought in, all that reward money, makes a man wonder where it all went. Katherine's mind worked through the pieces of a larger puzzle. The missing bounty hunters, vanishing prisoners, and now this carefully orchestrated confrontation. The Raven Gang wasn't just here about her identity. They were after something specific. I imagine that kind of money would be hard to track, she replied carefully, noting how Martinez had shifted to cover the kitchen door where Maria stood watching. After so many years. Unless, Wilson interjected, moving closer to the bar. Someone kept detailed records. The Ghost was known for being methodical, documenting every capture, every reward. Word is, she maintained a ledger, insurance, in case any of her bounties tried claiming false arrest. And there it was. Katherine kept her expression neutral even as understanding dawned. The ledger they sought contained more than just bounty records. It documented connections, corrupt officials, and a network of criminals who'd bought their freedom through means that wouldn't survive official scrutiny. "Interesting theory," she said, deliberately keeping her tone dismissive. "Though I suspect after 3 years, any such records would be long gone." Raven's smile turned predatory. That's not what Marshal Chambers thought. Before his unfortunate accident, he was quite convinced the Ghost's ledger still existed, that someone was using it to track a pattern of suspicious prison breaks and missing bounties across 3 territories. Lightning flashed again as Katherine caught Maria's subtle hand signal. More riders were arriving, taking positions behind the saloon. The Raven gang was establishing a perimeter, preparing for something bigger than mere intimidation. "Of course," Raven continued, his voice carrying deadly emphasis, "Chambers was also asking questions about certain government officials, about judges who seemed remarkably lenient with specific prisoners, about marshals who always seemed to lose their most valuable captives during transport." "Sounds like dangerous questions," Katherine observed, her trained eye noting how Wilson's hand never strayed far from his pearl-handled Colt. "The kind that might lead to unfortunate accidents." "Indeed." Raven stood slowly, his movement deliberately casual, but carrying unmistakable menace. "Which brings us to you, Miss Morgan, a woman with no past, asking similar questions, taking such an interest in local law enforcement matters." He spread the wanted poster on the bar between them. "The resemblance is remarkable, wouldn't you say?" Katherine studied the old poster, remembering the day it was drawn. She'd just brought in the notorious Carson brothers, a capture that had cemented the Ghost's reputation across the frontier. The artist had captured her younger self well, perhaps too well. "I suppose many women might share a passing resemblance," she replied evenly, "especially in a poor sketch from years ago." "Perhaps." Raven's hand moved to his duster, retrieving not a weapon, but a letter. "Or perhaps you'd care to explain this communication we intercepted, a message to former Marshal Sarah Hawkins, asking about certain prison transport routes, signed with a very particular symbol." Katherine's blood ran cold. Sarah had been one of her most trusted allies during her bounty hunting days. They'd developed a private code for sharing sensitive information. If the Raven gang had intercepted their correspondence. "I'm afraid you've lost me, Mr. Raven," she said, though her mind was already calculating options, measuring distances to weapons and exits. "I'm just a saloon owner trying to run a business. A business that happens to sit at the crossroads of 3 major prisoner transport routes," Martinez added with dark amusement. "Perfect spot for someone monitoring law enforcement movements, for someone building evidence against a certain organization." Thunder rolled closer as Katherine noted subtle shifts in the gang's positioning. They were preparing for violence, establishing clear firing lines while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. Through the window, she glimpsed more, black-clad figures taking strategic positions around the saloon. "I think," Raven said softly, his hand finally moving to rest openly on his holstered revolver, "it's time we dropped this little charade. We know who you are. Ghost. The only question is whether you'll tell us where to find that ledger or if we need to employ more persuasive methods." Quick pause, dear viewers. If you're enjoying this tale of deception and danger, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals a secret that changes everything. Katherine felt time slow as she read the subtle tells preceding violence. Raven's trigger finger twitching slightly, Wilson's weight shifting to a shooter's stance, Martinez's eyes darting to check his men's positions. They thought they had her cornered, trapped in her own saloon. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed the Ghost was just another bounty hunter, someone who relied on strength and speed alone. They hadn't asked themselves why she'd earned that name, how she could seem to appear and disappear like smoke, turning the hunters into the hunted. Sometimes, Katherine reflected, watching storm clouds gather above Silver Peak. The most dangerous predator wasn't the one wearing the black duster or carrying the fancy gun. Sometimes it was the one who'd spent years learning when to strike and when to fade away, waiting for exactly the right moment. And that moment was coming. As surely as the storm about to break over Silver Peak, Katherine's hands remained steady as she continued polishing glasses, each movement precise, while her mind calculated angles and options. The rain hammered against the saloon's windows with increasing intensity, matching the mounting tension within. "You seem very certain about these theories, Mr. Raven," she said, carefully setting aside the glass she'd been cleaning. "Though I wonder why the notorious Raven gang would concern themselves with old bounty hunting records." Raven's cold smile widened. "Let's just say our employers have a vested interest in certain historical documents, particularly those that might shed light on current business arrangements." Through the windows, lightning illuminated more black-clad figures taking position around the saloon. Katherine counted at least 12 men visible, which meant probably twice that number hidden in the shadows. The Raven gang wasn't just looking for information, they were preparing for war. "Tell me, Ghost," Raven continued, emphasizing the name with deadly precision, "did you really think nobody would notice the pattern? How every time you appeared in a town, certain arrangements started falling apart, certain prisoners stopped disappearing so conveniently." Maria moved slightly in the kitchen doorway, her hand still hidden beneath her apron. Katherine caught her subtle signal. 3 more riders had appeared behind the saloon, cutting off the back exit. They were being systematically surrounded. "You're well informed," Katherine replied, noting how Wilson's fingers kept brushing his pearl-handled Colt. "Though I'm curious who's paying for all this attention to ancient history," Martinez laughed darkly. "Ancient history that's worth a fortune to the right people. Every name in that ledger represents power over judges, marshals, politicians, the kind of power that builds empires." Understanding crystallized in Katherine's mind. The ledger didn't just document her bounties, it contained proof of corruption stretching from territorial judges to the highest levels of law enforcement. A web of bribes, threats, and murdered witnesses that had allowed certain criminals to build their empire. "And now you want that power for yourselves," she said softly, pieces clicking into place. "That's what this is really about. Not just finding the ghost, but acquiring proof of who's really controlling the territory's justice system." "Smart woman," Raven approved, though his hand never strayed far from his weapon. "Though I suspect you've already figured out it goes beyond mere territorial corruption. The organization we represent has larger ambitions." Katherine's trained eye caught subtle movements outside, mounted men taking positions at every intersection surrounding the saloon. The Raven gang was executing a military-style containment operation, one that spoke of planning far beyond simple intimidation. "The missing bounty hunters," she said, mind racing through implications. "The vanishing prisoners. You're not just protecting corrupt officials, you're building an army." "An army of professionals," Wilson interjected, pride evident in his voice. "Every freed prisoner becomes a soldier in our organization. Loyal, well-trained, and most importantly, completely dependent on our protection to stay free. And the Ghost's ledger would give you leverage over anyone who might oppose you," Katherine finished. "Proof of which officials can be bought, which ones need to have. Accidents." Raven's smile turned predatory. "Precisely, though I admit finding you alive is an unexpected bonus. The Ghost's reputation would be quite valuable to our cause. Assuming you're willing to be reasonable about employment opportunities." Thunder crashed overhead as Katherine read the underlying threat. They weren't just after the ledger, they wanted to turn the Ghost's legend to their own purposes. To transform a symbol of justice into a weapon for their criminal empire. "And if I'm not interested in new employment?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then, unfortunately," Martinez said, his hand moving to his holster, "this becomes a much messier conversation, though I suspect watching this saloon burn might help jog your memory about that ledger's location." Katherine felt the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere as the gang members prepared for violence. Their movements were precise, professional. Each man knowing his role in what they assumed would be a quick and brutal demonstration of power. Quick pause, friends. If you're enjoying this tale of suspense and secrets, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals a truth that will leave you speechless. Through the rain-streaked windows, Katherine caught glimpses of townspeople, hurrying for cover, sensing the impending violence. The storm's fury matched the tension building within the saloon as two deadly forces prepared to collide. "Last chance, Ghost," Raven said softly, all pretense of civility falling away. "Tell us where to find the ledger, agree to join our organization, and everyone walks away happy. Refuse." He gestured to his men who had established clear firing lines throughout the saloon. "Well, I'm sure you can imagine the alternatives." Katherine's mind raced through options, measuring angles and distances with the precision that had made her legendary. The Raven Gang had numbers, position, and the element of surprise. What they didn't know was that the Ghost hadn't earned her reputation through simple gunfighting. Sometimes she reflected, as her fingers brushed the hidden mechanisms she'd spent months preparing. The most dangerous weapon wasn't a gun at all. Sometimes it was patience, preparation, and the ability to turn a carefully laid trap against those who thought themselves the hunters. The storm was about to break over Silver Peak, and with it would come a reckoning none of them expected. The saloon fell into deadly silence as Katherine measured her next move carefully. Years of experience had taught her that the moments before violence erupted were often the most critical, when small decisions could mean the difference between life and death. "You seem very confident in your position, Mr. Raven," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once made hardened outlaws reconsider their choices. Her matched Remingtons appeared in her hands with practiced grace, their barrels catching the fractured light in ways that made it impossible to track her true location. "Shoot her!" Raven commanded, but his men's confusion was evident in their hesitation. The mirrors and shadows made it impossible to distinguish Katherine's real position from her reflections, while the reconfigured bar provided her with perfect cover. "You should have done your research more thoroughly, gentlemen." Katherine's voice seemed to come from multiple directions, another carefully planned effect of her modifications to the saloon's acoustics. "They didn't call me the Ghost, just for my ability to track bounties." Quick pause, dear viewers. If you're enjoying this tale of cunning and justice, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals an ingenious twist that changes everything. The first shots from Raven's men went wide, shattering mirrors and splintering wood, but finding no target. Katherine's return fire was precise and methodical, each bullet carefully placed to wound rather than kill. A shot knocked Wilson's pearl-handled Colt from his grip before he could properly aim. Another caught Martinez in the shoulder, spinning him away from his covered position. "Impossible!" Raven snarled, firing at a reflection only to find he'd wasted precious ammunition on an illusion. "Nobody's this good." "The Ghost is," Maria called from the kitchen doorway, where she had ducked behind her own concealed barricade. Perhaps you should have asked yourself why so many of her captured bounties spoke of fighting a shadow. Through the confusion, Katherine continued her systematic disruption of the Raven Gang's carefully planned operation. More hidden mechanisms activated, trapdoors dropping overconfident gunmen into reinforced cellars, weighted nets falling from concealed ceiling compartments, strategically placed smoke charges adding to the disorienting effect of the mirrors. You've spent months preparing for this, Raven realized, his voice carrying genuine admiration despite his deteriorating situation. This whole saloon, every modification, you knew someone would eventually come looking. The ghost earned her reputation through preparation as much as speed, Katherine replied, her voice seemingly coming from everywhere and nowhere, though I admit I expected it to be your employers who finally made a move, not their attack dogs. Another series of precise shots disarmed more of Raven's men, while outside the storm's intensity masked the approach of figures Katherine had positioned in anticipation of this moment. Sometimes the most effective trap was the one that appeared to be springing too early, while actually proceeding exactly as planned. Though I wonder if you've asked yourself why the ghost might choose this particular saloon as her hiding place. Raven's eyes narrowed slightly, the first hint of uncertainty crossing his face. Behind him, Wilson shifted uneasily, his professional instincts sensing something wasn't quite right. Even the most hardened killers learned to trust such instincts if they lived long enough. The location's strategic value is obvious, Raven replied, though Katherine noted how his gaze began scanning the room more carefully. Perfect position to monitor law enforcement movements, prisoner transports, judicial communications. Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had often preceded dramatic shifts in seemingly hopeless situations. True enough, though, there might be other reasons to choose a building, structural reasons perhaps, the kind that take months of careful preparation to properly arrange. Understanding dawned in Martinez's eyes as he suddenly noticed details that had been deliberately obscured. The carefully positioned support beams, the subtle modifications to certain floorboards, the way specific furniture pieces seemed anchored. Just so. The whole saloon's a trap, he breathed, professional appreciation mixing with growing alarm. You might say, I've made some renovations, Katherine confirmed, her hand moving to an innocuous lever concealed beneath the bar. Amazing what you can accomplish with a background in bounty hunting and a few months of carpenter's work. Through the window, lightning illuminated the growing panic on the faces of Raven's men as they realized their careful containment operation had become something else entirely. They thought they were springing a trap on a cornered fugitive. Instead, they'd walked into a carefully prepared killing ground. Nobody move, Raven ordered, his voice carrying the edge of a man who recognized how quickly control could slip away. She's bluffing. Even the ghost couldn't. His words cut off as Katherine pulled the lever, triggering the first of her hidden mechanisms. The heavy oak bar, which had appeared solidly anchored to the floor, suddenly swung outward on concealed hinges, creating an instant barricade between her and Raven's men. Simultaneously, strategically placed panels in the walls dropped away, revealing carefully positioned mirrors that transformed the saloon's lighting, creating disorienting patterns of reflection and shadow. What in God's name? Wilson started, but Katherine was already in motion. The legendary speed that had earned her the nickname Ghost came into play as she seemed to flow like smoke between positions. Thunder crashed overhead as Raven's carefully orchestrated operation continued to unravel. Through the chaos of smoke, mirrors, and precisely placed shots, Katherine maintained her systematic dismantling of the gang's positions. Each movement was calculated, every bullet strategically placed to neutralize rather than kill. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Ghost, Raven called out, his voice betraying growing frustration as another of his men fell to a perfectly placed shot that shattered his gun hand. Our organization has reach you can't imagine. Connections that go all the way to Washington, Katherine interrupted, her voice seeming to drift from multiple directions. To Judge Morrison's chambers? To Governor Hampton's private office? You'd be surprised what a careful bounty hunter learns to document over the years. Lightning illuminated the savage comprehension on Raven's face as he realized the true scope of what the ledger contained. That's why they want it so badly. He breathed, not just for the local operations, but for everything it proves about who's really controlling the territory. Through her carefully positioned mirrors, Katherine tracked the remaining threats. Martinez had managed to drag himself behind an overturned table, while Wilson was trying to work his way around to the kitchen entrance. Outside, more of the gang's reinforcements were arriving, but they'd find their own surprises waiting. "Tell me something, Raven," Katherine said, using her voice to draw attention while she maneuvered to a new position. "Did your employers mention what happened to the last group they sent to find that ledger 3 months ago in Sacramento?" The gang leader's response was cut short by the sudden sound of gunfire from outside, but not the sporadic shots of a typical gunfight. This was the coordinated volley of experienced lawmen working in concert. Katherine allowed herself a small smile as she recognized the signature tactics of her old friend, Marshal Sarah Hawkins. "That would be the real reason I chose this location," Katherine explained, keeping Raven's attention divided. "Perfect spot to monitor law enforcement movements, just like you said. Perfect spot to coordinate with trusted allies, too." "You planned this," Martinez growled from his position. "Used our attack as cover to spring your own trap." "The Ghost earned her reputation through strategy as much as shooting," Maria called from her protected position. "You thought you were the hunters, but you've been the prey all along." More gunfire erupted outside as Sarah's deputies engaged the gang's reinforcements. Katherine had spent months coordinating this operation, ensuring every piece would be in place when the Raven gang finally made their move. The intercepted letter to Sarah hadn't been a security breach, it had been bait. "Your men outside will find themselves dealing with more than just federal marshals," Katherine continued, using her voice to mask her movement toward a new firing position. "I believe you're familiar with Joshua Running Cloud, the Apache tracker, who helped me bring in the Carson brothers." Raven's curse told her he recognized the name. Running Cloud's ability to move unseen through any terrain was legendary, matched only by his skill with a rifle. The gang's carefully positioned reinforcements were about to learn why. "You've been playing a longer game than just hiding out," Wilson realized, his professional appreciation evident despite their adversarial positions. "Building your network, gathering allies, waiting for the right moment to strike." "The Ghost didn't earn her reputation by being predictable," Katherine replied. Another series of precise shots forced Wilson to abandon his attempt to flank through the kitchen, though I admit your employers made it easier by being so consistent in their methods. Quick pause, friends. If you're enjoying this tale of strategy and suspense, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals a master plan that will leave you speechless. Thunder rolled again as Katherine activated another set of her carefully prepared mechanisms. Smoke charges concealed in the ceiling created new patterns of shadow and confusion, while strategically placed mirrors caught the lightning's flashes to create disorienting patterns of light. "It's over, Raven," she called out, noting how his remaining men were clustering closer to their leader, professional discipline eroding under the sustained pressure of fighting an enemy they couldn't properly target. "Your reinforcements are being rounded up by federal marshals, your employers. Operation is about to be exposed. The only question is whether you're smart enough to survive what comes next." "You think this ends with us?" Raven's laugh held genuine amusement despite his deteriorating situation. "Our organization doesn't just control a few corrupt judges, Ghost. We own entire territories. One setback won't change that." "Perhaps," Katherine acknowledged, moving into her final position, "but I suspect your employers might have a different perspective once they realize how much evidence that ledger actually contains. Amazing what people will reveal when they think they're just bribing a simple bounty hunter." Through the windows, she caught glimpses of black-clad figures being led away in handcuffs as Sarah's deputies secured the perimeter. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned, though the hardest part was still to come. The storm continued, its assault on Silver Peak, as Katherine maintained her tactical advantage. Through the chaos of smoke and mirrors, she observed how Raven's remaining men had clustered around their leader, their professional composure eroding under the sustained pressure of fighting an opponent they couldn't properly target. "Your employers made one crucial mistake, Raven," Katherine said, her voice carrying clearly through the carefully designed acoustics of her modified saloon. "They assumed the Ghost's reputation came solely from skill with a gun. They never asked themselves how one bounty hunter managed to track so many high-value targets across 5 territories. Information," Wilson muttered, professional appreciation mixing with growing comprehension. Every bounty was a chance to gather intelligence about the organization's operations. Katherine allowed herself a small smile as she activated another smoke charge, further obscuring her position. Each captured outlaw revealed pieces of the puzzle, which judges could be bribed, which marshals would look the other way, which politicians were accepting payments to protect certain interests. Through the windows, lightning illuminated more of Sarah's deputies, leading captured gang members away in handcuffs. The methodical operation was proceeding exactly as planned, though Katherine knew the most dangerous moments still lay ahead. "The ledger doesn't just document bounties," she continued, using her voice to maintain their attention while she maneuvered to a new position. "It contains proof of every transaction, every bribe, every connection in your employer's network of corruption, enough evidence to bring down their entire operation." Raven's laugh held genuine amusement despite his deteriorating situation. "You really think it's that simple? That exposing a few corrupt officials will somehow dismantle an organization that controls entire territories?" "Not by itself," Katherine acknowledged. "But combined with the evidence other bounty hunters have been gathering, the testimonies we've collected from turned witnesses, the financial records we've accumulated. Amazing how many people are willing to talk when they realize which way the wind is blowing." Understanding dawned in Martinez's eyes as he realized the true scope of what they'd walked into. "The Ghost wasn't just hiding," he said softly. "She was coordinating with other hunters, building a case against the entire organization." "Your employers aren't the only ones who know how to build networks," Katherine confirmed. "Though I suspect they'll be particularly interested in learning how many of their trusted associates have already agreed to testify in exchange for leniency." Outside, more gunfire erupted as Running Cloud's men engaged a group of gang reinforcements trying to approach through the back alleys. Katherine had positioned her allies carefully, ensuring every possible escape route was covered. "You've been playing a longer game than anyone realized," Raven said, genuine respect entering his voice despite their adversarial positions. "Using your reputation as the Ghost to gather intelligence while appearing to simply hunt bounties." Quick pause, dear viewers. If you're enjoying this tale of intrigue and justice, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals a conspiracy that will shock you to your core. "The best hunters understand patience," Katherine replied, noting how Wilson was trying to work his way around for a better angle. A precisely placed shot splintered the floor near his feet, sending him scrambling back to cover. "Sometimes you have to let your prey think they're in control, right up until the trap closes." Thunder crashed overhead as Katherine activated the final phase of her prepared mechanisms. Hidden panels in the ceiling dropped away, releasing a cascade of documents into the saloon. Wanted posters, bank records, telegrams, all carefully collected evidence of the organization's operations. "Consider this a preview," she called out as papers continued to flutter through the smoke-filled air. "A small sample of what that ledger contains. Your employers might want to consider how much more evidence will become public if anything unfortunate happens to me or my allies." Raven cursed as he recognized specific documents, pieces of evidence that implicated the highest levels of their organization. This was never about just protecting yourself, he realized. You've turned the ledger into insurance. Insurance that's been carefully distributed to trusted associates across 3 territories, Katherine confirmed, with instructions to release everything if certain conditions aren't met. Your employers wanted the Ghost's reputation. Well, they're about to learn why that reputation wasn't built on gunfighting alone. Through her positioned mirrors, Katherine caught the subtle shift in Raven's stance that preceded violence. The gang leader was too professional to accept defeat. Without one final attempt to salvage the situation, his remaining men recognized the signs as well, preparing for what they assumed would be a dramatic last stand. "Final chance, Raven," Katherine offered, though she knew what his choice would be. Men like him didn't survive in their profession by surrendering, no matter how hopeless the situation might appear. Surrender now, testify against your employers, and perhaps you'll see daylight again someday. The gang leader's response was a predatory smile that had preceded death for dozens of adversaries. "You know that's not how this ends, Ghost," he said softly, his hands moving with deliberate precision toward his holstered weapons. "Some reputations have to be maintained, no matter the cost." Time seemed to crystallize in the smoke-filled saloon as Katherine read Raven's intent. Years of experience had taught her to recognize the subtle tells that preceded violence, the slight shift in stance, the calculated positioning of hands, the way a professional gunman's eyes focused just before drawing. "You should understand something about reputations, Raven," Katherine said quietly, her own movements precise and measured as she prepared for what would come next. "The ones that last aren't built on violence alone. They're built on choices." Through her carefully positioned mirrors, she tracked Wilson and Martinez as they moved to support their leader. Despite their injuries, both men were experienced killers who understood the choreography of coordinated violence. They would try to split her attention, force her to defend against multiple angles simultaneously. The choice to show mercy when killing would be easier, Katherine continued, using her voice to maintain their focus while she made her final adjustments. The choice to pursue justice instead of vengeance. The choice to give even the most hardened outlaws a chance to surrender. Lightning illuminated the scene through rain-streaked windows as Raven's remaining men took their positions. Outside, the sounds of gunfire had diminished as Sarah's deputies and Running Cloud's warriors secured the perimeter, but within the ETUI saloon, tension built toward its inevitable breaking point. "Interesting philosophy," Raven replied, his tone carrying deadly courtesy. "Though I noticed the Ghost's reputation wasn't built on surrendering when faced with superior numbers." "Superior numbers don't always determine the outcome," Katherine said softly. "Sometimes victory depends on understanding which targets matter most." Her meaning registered in Raven's eyes a fraction of a second too late. As the gang leader began his draw, Katherine activated the final mechanism she'd prepared for this moment. The seemingly solid floor beneath Raven's feet suddenly pivoted, throwing off his balance at the crucial instant when speed and accuracy mattered most. What followed demonstrated why Katherine, the Ghost Morgan, had earned her legendary reputation. Her first shot caught Raven's primary weapon before it could clear leather, sending it spinning into the smoke-filled air. Her second shot disrupted Wilson's attempt to provide covering fire, while her third forced Martinez to abandon his flanking maneuver. "Impossible," Wilson breathed, professional appreciation mixing with disbelief. 3 precisely placed shots, faster than seemed humanly possible, each finding its target despite the chaos of smoke and shadows. Quick pause, friends. If you're enjoying this display of legendary skill, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals a secret that changes everything. But Katherine wasn't finished, as Raven recovered his balance and reached for his backup weapon. She demonstrated why some reputations transcended mere speed. Her fourth shot caught the gang leader's secondary gun. Her fifth removed Wilson's remaining weapon, and her sixth forced Martinez to abandon his final attempt at resistance. 6 shots, Maria commented from her protected position, genuine awe in her voice. 6 guns disabled in less time than it takes to blink. Now you understand why they called her the Ghost. Thunder crashed overhead as Katherine maintained her coverage of the disarmed men. Through the windows, she glimpsed Sarah Hawkins herself approaching the saloon, leading a contingent of deputies to secure the scene. The operation was entering its final phase. "You had opportunities to kill us," Raven said quietly, genuine curiosity entering his voice despite their situation. "Multiple clear shots. Why show restraint?" "Because dead men can't testify," Katherine replied evenly. "Can't reveal what they know about their employer's operations. Can't help dismantle the corrupt machine they've served." Understanding dawned in the gang leader's eyes as he realized the full scope of her strategy. She hadn't just outfought them, she'd maneuvered them into position to become witnesses against their own organization. Every move, from the leaked letter to the apparent exposure of her identity, had been calculated to serve this larger purpose. "Your employers wanted the Ghost reputation," Katherine continued, noting how Sarah's deputies were taking up positions around the saloon's perimeter. "Well, they're about to learn why that reputation wasn't built on body counts. Sometimes the most effective strategy isn't about how many you kill, it's about how many you can turn against their masters." Through the settling smoke, Maria emerged from her position, a loaded shotgun covering the disarmed men with professional competence. The cook's previous demeanor of subservience had vanished, replaced by the unmistakable bearing of a trained deputy marshal. The entire operation was a trap, Martinez realized, professional respect evident in his voice despite their defeat. "Not just the saloon's modifications, but everything. You used our own intelligence gathering against us, let us think we were closing in on the Ghost's identity, while actually drawing you into position to witness against your employers," Katherine confirmed. "Amazing how much more cooperative criminals become when faced with federal charges and evidence they can't deny." The storm's intensity began to diminish as Sarah Hawkins entered the Silver Peak Saloon, her marshal's badge catching the lamplight. Behind her, experienced deputies moved with practiced efficiency to secure the scene, their weapons trained steadily on Raven and his disarmed lieutenants. "Quite a performance, Katherine," Sarah said, surveying the aftermath of the confrontation, "though I suspect our friends here don't yet appreciate just how thoroughly they've been outmaneuvered." Katherine maintained her coverage of the prisoners, while Sarah's deputies began gathering the scattered documents that had fallen during the fight. Each piece of evidence had been carefully selected to demonstrate the scope of their investigation into the organization's operations. "Your employers made a fundamental mistake, Raven," Katherine explained, noting how the gang leader's professional demeanor had shifted to careful calculation as he assessed his deteriorating position. "They assumed the Ghost's disappearance 3 years ago meant she'd gone into hiding. They never considered she might be coordinating with federal authorities to build a comprehensive case against their entire operation." Sarah produced a set of official documents, holding them where Raven and his men could clearly read the federal letterhead. "These are warrants authorizing a multi-territorial investigation into corruption, racketeering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, signed by 3 federal judges whose integrity your organization hasn't managed to compromise. You've been gathering evidence for years. Wilson realized, professional appreciation mixing with growing comprehension. Each bounty the Ghost brought in wasn't just about the reward. It was an opportunity to collect testimony, documents, proof of the organization's methods. Amazing what criminals will reveal when they think they're just trying to negotiate better terms, Katherine confirmed. Every bribed judge, every corrupted marshal, every compromised politician, it all went into the ledger, along with proof of who was really controlling the territory's justice system. Through the windows, more federal marshals were arriving, leading wagons designed for prisoner transport. The operation was shifting from capture to securing evidence and preparing for the legal proceedings to come. Your organization's fundamental weakness, Sarah continued, examining the gathered documents with practiced precision, was its reliance on corruption and intimidation. Once we began offering witnesses federal protection and immunity in exchange for testimony, that foundation started cracking. Quick pause, dear viewers. If you're enjoying this tale of justice and strategy, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of power. Raven's composure showed its first real crack as he processed the implications. "The missing prisoners," he said softly, "the ones we thought had escaped or been eliminated. You've been hiding them, protecting them while they testified." "Federal marshals have safe houses across 3 territories," Katherine confirmed. "Perfect places to protect witnesses while building a case that could withstand any legal challenge. Your employer's influence over local courts won't help them in a federal prosecution." Maria, still covering the prisoners with her shotgun, allowed herself a small smile. "And now you understand why we needed you alive, Mr. Raven. Dead men can't testify about their employer's methods, can't confirm the evidence we've gathered, can't help dismantle the corrupt machine they've served." Sarah began organizing the deputies to secure and catalogue the scattered evidence. Each document would need to be properly documented for the federal prosecution to come. "You have a choice to make, gentlemen," she addressed the captured gang members. "Cooperation now could significantly influence how the federal prosecutors view your cases. The organization will have us killed the moment we enter custody," Martinez objected, though Katherine noted how his professional demeanor had shifted to careful consideration of options. "Unless you're not in regular custody," Katherine countered. "Unless you're under federal protection, in locations your employers can't access, providing testimony that ensures your value to the prosecution outweighs any benefit from eliminating you." Understanding dawned in Raven's eyes as he realized the full scope of the trap they'd walked into. "The Ghost's reputation was never just about hunting bounties," he said quietly. "It was about understanding how to turn the hunters into the hunted." "A reputation built on strategy as much as skill," Katherine confirmed, "though I suspect your employers will be particularly interested in learning how many of their trusted associates have already chosen to cooperate. Loyalty, after all, depends largely on who offers the better terms." Thunder rolled in the distance as Sarah's deputies began processing the prisoners. Outside, the storm was finally passing, much like the organization's illusion of invulnerability. Years of careful preparation were culminating in a moment that would reshape the territory's future. Sarah Hawkins directed her deputies with practiced efficiency as they secured the prisoners and gathered evidence. The aftermath of the confrontation had transformed the Silver Peak Saloon into a carefully orchestrated federal operation, with each piece of evidence being documented and catalogued according to strict protocols. "Your employers will notice. Something's wrong soon," Katherine observed, maintaining her vigilance despite the prisoners' secured status. "When their scheduled communications go unanswered, they'll realize the Raven Gang's operation has been compromised." Through the windows, she noted more federal marshals establishing a secure perimeter around Silver Peak. The town was being quietly locked down, preventing any warning from reaching the organization's leadership about their operations exposure. Which means we're operating on borrowed time, Sarah confirmed, examining a particularly significant set of documents. They'll send more men, probably within 24 hours, once they realize their initial force has been neutralized. Raven studied both women with professional assessment, his tactical mind clearly processing options and implications. "You're counting on that," he said finally, understanding dawning in his eyes. "This isn't just about capturing us. You're using our arrest to draw out bigger targets." Katherine allowed herself a small nod of acknowledgement. "Your employers have been careful about maintaining their distance from direct operations, using intermediaries, cutouts, and disposable assets to protect themselves from legal consequences. But a federal operation of this scale," Martinez interjected, his professional experience allowing him to see the strategy unfolding, "especially one that's captured their primary enforcement arm. They'll have to respond directly. They can't risk letting us potentially testify." "Which means they'll have to expose themselves," Sarah confirmed, her satisfaction evident as she observed their growing comprehension. "Send their most trusted operators, perhaps even appear personally, to manage the situation, creating opportunities we've been waiting years to exploit." Through the settling smoke, Maria continued her coverage of the prisoners while simultaneously coordinating with other undercover agents who had maintained their own surveillance positions throughout Silver Peak. The operation was shifting from capture to preparation for what would come next. Quick pause, friends. If you're enjoying this tale of strategy and justice, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals a master plan that will leave you speechless. "You've been playing a longer game than anyone realized," Wilson observed, professional appreciation evident despite their adversarial positions. "Using the Ghost's reputation to gather intelligence, coordinate with federal authorities, and prepare for this moment." Katherine moved to examine the gathered evidence, each piece representing years of careful documentation and strategic planning. "Your organization's power depends on the appearance of invulnerability," she explained, "on the belief that their influence makes them untouchable by normal law enforcement. But that influence depends on maintaining distance from direct criminal actions," Sarah added, her tone carrying the authority of federal law. "On using intermediaries like the Raven Gang to handle the violent aspects of their operation. Once they're forced to act directly, they become vulnerable to federal prosecution," Raven finished, genuine respect entering his voice despite their circumstances. "No amount of corrupted local officials can protect them from charges backed by direct evidence of their involvement." Maria secured another set of documents, her previous role as a simple cook completely replaced by the bearing of an experienced federal agent. "Which is why we need your cooperation, gentlemen. Your testimony about their methods, combined with the evidence we've gathered, could dismantle their entire operation," Martinez concluded, his tactical mind clearly weighing options and potential consequences. "Assuming we survive long enough to testify." Katherine's voice carried quiet confidence as she addressed their concerns. "Federal marshals have been preparing secure locations across 3 territories, safe houses that your employers can't access, protected by agents whose integrity can't be compromised. And once the federal prosecution begins," Sarah added, "your value as witnesses will make ensuring your survival in the organization's best interest. After all, dead witnesses can't modify their testimony or suddenly develop convenient memory lapses." Thunder rolled in the distance as the storm continued to pass, much like the organization's illusion of invulnerability. Through the windows, Katherine observed more federal reinforcements arriving, establishing additional layers of security around Silver Peak. As Sarah's deputies continued processing evidence and securing prisoners, Katherine noticed a subtle shift in Raven's demeanor. The gang leader's professional calculation had given way to deeper strategic consideration as he assessed their position and options. "Tell me something, Ghost," he said finally, his voice carrying genuine curiosity. "The modifications to this saloon, the coordinated federal response, the carefully gathered evidence. How long have you really been planning this operation?" Katherine moved to examine the saloon's hidden mechanisms, each one representing months of meticulous preparation. "The Ghost's disappearance 3 years ago wasn't about hiding," she explained. "It was about creating an opportunity to work without the organization's scrutiny. Through the windows, more federal marshals were establishing defensive positions throughout Silver Peak. The town was being systematically transformed into a fortress prepared for the organization's inevitable response to their operations exposure. 3 years of gathering evidence," Sarah elaborated, sorting through documents with practiced efficiency. "Building a network of witnesses, documenting the organization's methods, and preparing for this moment. The Ghost's reputation provided perfect cover for coordinating with federal authorities." Martinez studied the gathered evidence with professional assessment. "The ledger isn't just about bounties and corruption," he observed. "It's a complete blueprint of the organization's operations, their methods, their vulnerabilities. Amazing what people reveal when they think they're just dealing with a simple bounty hunter," Katherine confirmed. "Every bribed official, every compromised lawman, every connection in their network of influence, all carefully documented and verified." Maria, maintaining her coverage of the prisoners, allowed herself a small smile. "And now you understand why we chose Silver Peak for this operation. The perfect location to monitor their movements, intercept their communications, and prepare for their eventual response." Quick pause, dear viewers. If you're enjoying this tale of intrigue and justice, hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals a plan that will shock you to your core. "But it's more than that," Wilson interjected, his tactical mind piecing together the larger strategy. "You're not just gathering evidence. You're systematically dismantling their ability to respond effectively." Katherine nodded in acknowledgement. Every captured operative, every exposed connection, every compromised route of communication. And it all reduces their options for dealing with this situation, forces them to take risks they'd normally avoid. "Which is exactly what we need," Sarah added, her satisfaction evident as she reviewed particularly damning documents. "Federal prosecutors require direct evidence of the organization's leadership involving themselves in criminal activities, something their careful use of intermediaries has previously prevented." Through the settling dust, Katherine observed how Raven's professional demeanor had shifted to careful calculation. The gang leader was clearly weighing options, assessing potential outcomes with the precision that had made him so effective in his role. "Your employers will send others," Katherine said quietly, addressing the unspoken question in his assessment. "Probably their most trusted operators, given the situation's severity, men who can be directly connected to the organization's leadership." "Creating opportunities for federal agents to gather evidence that can't be explained away through intermediaries," Sarah confirmed, "direct connections that even corrupted judges can't dismiss." Martinez's laugh held genuine appreciation despite their circumstances. "You're using our capture as bait," he realized, "drawing out bigger targets by threatening the organization's entire operation." "The best traps," Katherine replied, "are the ones where your prey's only options force them to expose themselves. Your employers can't risk letting you potentially testify, can't trust local authorities to handle the situation, can't maintain their usual distance from direct action. So they'll have to respond personally," Raven concluded, professional respect evident in his voice. expose themselves to federal jurisdiction in ways they've previously avoided, all because the ghost managed to turn their own methods against them. Outside, the storm's intensity began to build again, matching the mounting tension as federal forces prepared for the organization's inevitable response. Katherine moved to activate additional defensive mechanisms she'd prepared throughout the saloon, each one designed to counter specific tactical approaches. "You have a choice to make, gentlemen," Sarah addressed the prisoners, her tone carrying federal authority. "Cooperation now could significantly influence your position when the prosecutors begin building their cases. The organization's leadership will be looking for someone to blame for this situation." Lightning flashed across Silver Peak as Raven finally made his decision. Years of professional experience had taught him to recognize when tactical situations shifted beyond recovery, when survival required adapting to new realities rather than maintaining failing loyalties. "The organization's leadership," he began carefully, measuring each word, "maintains a private compound 50 miles north of here. Officially, it's registered as a mining company's headquarters, but in reality, it's the nerve center of their entire operation in this territory." Katherine watched him carefully, noting how Wilson and Martinez tensed at their leader's disclosure. The decision to cooperate wasn't made lightly by men of their profession. Each word could mean the difference between survival and a death sentence if the organization ever managed to reach them. "The compound sits on an elevated plateau," Raven continued, his tactical mind providing precise details. "Natural rock formations provide cover for defensive positions. They've modified the mining operations structure to include reinforced walls, hidden gun ports, and underground escape tunnels. At least 30 professional gunmen maintain security at all times, with additional forces available on short notice." Sarah moved quickly to document every detail, her experienced eye catching nuances that could prove crucial for federal prosecution. "Tell me about their communication systems," she prompted, maintaining professional focus despite this potential breakthrough. "Multiple redundant telegraph lines disguised as standard mining operations equipment," Raven replied. "They maintain constant contact with operations across 3 territories. Each line is coded differently, with schedules that change weekly. The organization's leadership receives updates every 6 hours, which means—" He glanced at the clock on the wall. "They'll be expecting our next report in less than 2 hours." Through the windows, Katherine observed more federal marshals establishing defensive positions throughout Silver Peak. The town was being transformed into a fortress, prepared for what would come once the organization realized their primary enforcement arm had been compromised. "The moment that report doesn't arrive," Martinez added, apparently deciding to follow his leader's example, "they'll initiate emergency protocols. First, they'll attempt alternate communication methods, specific riders using predetermined routes, signals visible from certain vantage points, even carrier pigeons in extreme cases. Quick pause, friends. If you're enjoying this tale of shifting loyalties and justice, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals a truth that changes everything." "When those fail," Wilson continued, professional pragmatism winning out over lingering loyalty, "they'll send their elite security team. Colonel James Richards leads them, former Army intelligence, disappeared after certain irregularities came to light regarding military supplies. 20 men, all with military backgrounds, trained specifically for crisis response." Katherine exchanged significant looks with Sarah. The organization's careful protocols, designed to protect their operations from detection, would now work against them. They wouldn't know their primary enforcement team had been captured until it was too late to prevent the evidence from being secured. "Richards isn't just their security chief," Katherine mused, memories from her bounty hunting days surfacing. He's their primary troubleshooter for sensitive situations, when witnesses need to disappear, when officials need persuading, when problems require permanent solutions. Maria, maintaining her vigilant coverage of the prisoners, added, "Her own intelligence. Our sources indicate Richards has direct access to the organization's leadership. He's one of the few who can bypass normal chains of command in emergency situations. If he responds personally—" "He will," Raven interrupted with certainty. "This situation's too critical for standard operators. We're compromised, potentially ready to testify. Their entire operation in this territory is at risk. Richards will come himself, probably with his best teams." "How will they approach?" Sarah asked, her deputies continuing to document every detail. Given the weather and terrain conditions? Raven moved to the window, studying the gathering storm with professional assessment. "Richards prefers to operate in low visibility conditions. They'll time their arrival for just before dawn, when the light's still poor. Multiple teams, coordinated approach from different directions. They'll have advanced scouts checking for obvious traps or ambushes." Katherine moved to examine the saloon's defensive preparations, each mechanism and position carefully designed for what was coming. "And your regular informants in town? The people who monitor movements for the organization?" "At least a dozen," Martinez provided. "Shopkeepers, stable hands, even a few minor officials. They watch key locations, track unusual activities, report anything suspicious. Any obvious attempt to move us to federal custody will be noted and reported immediately." Sarah began coordinating with her deputies, ensuring every defensive position was properly prepared and all evidence securely documented. "We'll need to move you soon," she told the prisoners, "before Richards and his teams arrive. Secure locations where the organization can't reach you." Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had often preceded dramatic shifts in seemingly impossible situations. "Their watchers in town will be our greatest advantage," she said softly. "Sometimes the best way to set a trap is to let your enemy think they've spotted your weakness. They'll be so focused on the obvious threat that they'll miss the real danger until it's too late." The storm intensified over Silver Peak as Katherine and Sarah coordinated their defensive preparations. Each position had been carefully planned months in advance, but Raven's intelligence about Richards and his response team required quick adjustments to their strategy. "Tell me more about Richards' tactical approach," Katherine prompted, studying the town's layout through the rain-streaked windows. "His military background suggests he'll follow standard protocols." Raven moved to examine the crude map Sarah's deputies had sketched of Silver Peak's surroundings. His professional assessment was precise, marking key positions with practiced efficiency. "He'll establish observation points here, here, and here." He indicated elevated positions surrounding the town, high ground with clear lines of sight to all major approaches. "His advanced teams will infiltrate under cover of darkness," Martinez added, his tactical knowledge evident as he warmed to the discussion. "Four-man units, moving independently but coordinated. They'll secure key intersections, establish fallback positions, identify potential threats before the main force arrives." Katherine nodded, her own experience confirming their assessment. "And his primary assault team? When they realize we've secured their enforcement arm and gathered evidence against the organization, that's where Richards differs from standard military doctrine," Wilson interjected, professional respect evident in his voice. "He's adapted his training for civilian territories, uses the population's normal movements as cover, blends his operations into regular town activities." Through the saloon's windows, Katherine observed the routine evening activities of Silver Peak's residents, shopkeepers closing for the night, miners heading to boarding houses, the usual flow of people that could easily conceal professional operators moving into position. Quick pause, dear viewers. If you're enjoying this tale of tactical intrigue, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals a strategy that will leave you breathless. His men will arrive in small groups, Raven continued, his tactical mind reconstructing their likely approach. Dressed as ordinary travelers, miners, merchants, they'll take rooms in different boarding houses, establish themselves in key locations throughout town. When Richards gives the signal, they'll move simultaneously. Sarah studied the map intently, marking potential defensive positions with her deputies. "How many men total should we expect?" she asked, her planning dependent on accurate numbers. "Besides the 20-man primary team?" Martinez calculated quickly. "At least another 15 for advanced reconnaissance and perimeter control, plus whatever local assets they can activate on short notice." "Local assets?" Katherine prompted, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Compromised law enforcement, paid informants, anyone they can pressure or bribe into supporting their operation," Wilson explained. "Richards maintains detailed files on potential assets in every major town, knows exactly who can be threatened, bought or blackmailed when needed." Maria, who had maintained her vigilant coverage of the prisoners while monitoring their discussion, added her own intelligence. "Our sources indicate Richards has been systematically developing these networks across 3 territories, building webs of influence and obligation he can activate in emergencies." Katherine moved to check her carefully prepared defensive mechanisms throughout the saloon. Each one had been designed for specific tactical scenarios, but Richards's sophisticated approach would require additional considerations. "The organization's leadership won't just be concerned about us," she mused, thinking through implications. "They'll worry about what other evidence we might have distributed, what other agents might be positioned in their territory. Which means Richards won't just focus on containing this situation," Sarah concluded, understanding dawning in her eyes. "He'll need to identify and eliminate any other potential threats to their operation." "Exactly," Raven confirmed. "His teams will search every building, question every possible source, ensure no other evidence exists before dealing with us directly. It's why he prefers to arrive just before dawn, gives him maximum time to work while maintaining cover of darkness." Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had often preceded dramatic shifts in seemingly impossible situations. "And that's exactly what we're counting on," she said softly. "The more thoroughly they search, the more time they spend questioning potential sources, the more exposed they become," Sarah finished, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Each interaction creates opportunities for federal agents to gather evidence, identify key personnel, document their methods." Through the gathering darkness, Katherine caught glimpses of more federal marshals taking their positions throughout Silver Peak. Each one had been carefully chosen and positioned over months of preparation, their presence concealed from the organization's local informants. "Richards is good," she acknowledged, respecting the professional capabilities of their approaching adversary, "but he's used to being the hunter, not the hunted, used to controlling the flow of information, not realizing every move his men make is being documented by federal agents." As night settled over Silver Peak, the storm's intensity matched the mounting tension within the saloon. Katherine watched through rain-streaked windows as the last ordinary townspeople hurried home, leaving streets that would soon become a battlefield. "Richards will have protocols for radio silence," she mused, checking her weapons with practiced efficiency. "How long before they realize something's wrong when your scheduled report doesn't arrive?" Raven studied the ornate clock on the saloon wall, his professional assessment precise. "Standard procedure gives a 1-hour window for delayed communications. After that, they'll attempt alternate contact methods for another hour. If those fail, that's when their advanced teams move." Martinez continued, his tactical knowledge evident, small groups appearing to be regular travelers. They'll take rooms at different establishments, establish observation points, start gathering intelligence about the situation. Sarah coordinated with her deputies, ensuring every federal agent was properly positioned and prepared. And Richards, himself, when does he typically commit his main force? He's methodical, Wilson replied, professional respect evident despite their adversarial positions. Won't move until his advanced teams confirm the situation. Usually arrives just before dawn, when visibility is poor, but there's enough light to operate effectively. Through the shadows, Katherine caught Maria's subtle signal: movement at the edge of town. The organization's first observers were already arriving, though they didn't realize every step they took was being documented by carefully positioned federal agents. Quick pause, friends. If you're enjoying this tale of mounting tension, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals a strategy that will shock you. Their initial teams will focus on gathering information, Raven explained, his tactical mind reconstructing their likely approach. They'll contact local informants, observe key locations, try to understand what happened to their primary enforcement arm. When they can't find answers, Katherine prompted, though she already knew the response. That's when Richards gets personally involved, Martinez answered. He doesn't trust reports from subordinates in critical situations, needs to assess things himself, especially when the organization's entire territorial operation might be compromised. Sarah studied the town's layout, marking potential observation points and approaches. His military background will influence his tactical choices. He'll want clear lines of sight, multiple escape routes, the ability to coordinate different teams simultaneously. But that same military training creates predictability, Katherine observed, moving to check another of her carefully prepared defensive positions. He'll follow certain protocols, expect specific responses to his actions. That's what we'll use against him. Maria maintained her vigilant watch while adding her own intelligence. Our sources indicate Richards has become increasingly paranoid about federal infiltration. He's been tightening security protocols, limiting information sharing between teams, personally verifying every significant operation. Which means he'll have to come himself, Raven concluded, understanding dawning in his eyes. The situation's too critical for him to trust subordinates. The organization's entire infrastructure in this territory could be at risk. Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had preceded victory in countless seemingly impossible situations. And that's exactly what we're counting on. The more personally involved he becomes, the more evidence we gather of direct connection between the organization's leadership and their criminal operations. Through the rain-streaked windows, more movement caught her attention. Regular travelers would have sought shelter from the storm, which meant these new arrivals were almost certainly Richards' advance teams taking position. Their initial focus will be on finding us, Wilson observed, professional experience evident in his assessment. They'll expect us to attempt moving their captured men to federal custody, try to intercept any prisoner transport. Let them watch, Sarah replied, satisfaction evident in her voice. Every moment they spend observing our obvious movements is another moment they miss the real operation unfolding around them. Katherine moved to activate another set of her carefully prepared mechanisms throughout the saloon. Each one had been designed not just for defense, but to channel their opponent's actions in specific directions. The organization's built its power on appearing untouchable, she said softly, checking firing lines and angles, on maintaining distance between their leadership and any direct criminal activity. Tonight, we force them to abandon that distance, to take direct action that federal prosecutors can use. Thunder rolled overhead as Sarah's deputies continued their preparations. The storm's intensity matched the growing tension as both sides moved their pieces into position for the coming confrontation. The hours crept by, with agonizing slowness, as Katherine observed more of Richard's advance teams arriving in Silver Peak. They moved with professional precision, establishing themselves in boarding houses and saloons, appearing to be nothing more than travelers seeking shelter from the storm. "Your men are well trained," she acknowledged to Raven, noting how each new arrival carefully avoided obvious patterns or groupings. "They maintain cover well, blend with normal town activities." The gang leader nodded, professional pride evident, despite their current circumstances. Richards personally selects and trains each operator. They spend months learning to move without drawing attention, to gather intelligence while appearing completely ordinary. Through the rain-streaked windows, Katherine tracked another group of travelers taking rooms at the Silver Star Hotel. Their movements were casual, unhurried, but her trained eye caught the subtle coordination in their positioning. "They're establishing a perimeter," Martinez observed, his tactical knowledge allowing him to read the pattern. "Creating overlapping fields of observation, covering every major approach to the saloon, standard containment protocol." Sarah studied the deployment through her own experienced lens. "How many teams has he positioned so far?" she asked, though her tone suggested she'd already counted. "At least 4 that I've spotted," Wilson replied, professional assessment precise. 4-man units, spread across different locations. They'll maintain regular communication through predetermined signals, build a complete picture of the situation before Richards commits his main force. Quick pause, dear viewers. If you're enjoying this tale of tactical chess, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals a strategy that changes everything. Katherine moved to check another of her defensive preparations, each one carefully designed to shape the coming confrontation. "Tell me more about their communication methods," she prompted. "How do they coordinate without revealing themselves?" "Simple signals that look natural," Raven explained. "A lamp in a specific window, laundry hung, in particular patterns, even the way someone walks past a location. Everything carries meaning if you know what to look for." Maria, maintaining her vigilant watch, added her own observations. "They're already setting up their signal network. The boarding house across the street just lit their 3rd-floor corner room. That's typically their indication that the initial perimeter is established. Which means Richards will be receiving his first detailed report soon," Sarah concluded, satisfaction evident in her voice. "Every movement they make, every signal they send, creates more evidence for federal prosecutors to use." Through the gathering darkness, Katherine caught glimpses of more federal marshals taking their own positions throughout Silver Peak. Each one had been carefully chosen and positioned over months of preparation, their presence hidden from the organization's local informants. "Your employers built their power on appearing untouchable," she mused, watching another of Richard's teams establish themselves at a strategic intersection, on maintaining distance between their leadership and any direct criminal activity. "Tonight, we force them to abandon that distance." Raven studied her with new understanding, professional respect evident in his assessment. "You're not just setting a trap for Richards," he realized. "You're creating a situation where the organization has to directly involve itself in criminal activities that federal prosecutors can use." "The best traps," Katherine replied softly, "are the ones where your prey has no choice but to spring them. They can't risk letting you testify, can't trust subordinates to handle the situation, can't maintain their usual distance from direct action." Thunder rolled overhead as Sarah's deputies continued their preparations. The storm's intensity matched the growing tension as both sides moved their pieces into position for the coming confrontation. Richards will realize something's wrong soon, Martinez warned, his tactical mind already calculating timelines. When our scheduled communications don't arrive, when his advanced teams can't locate us through normal channels. That's exactly what we're counting on, Katherine confirmed, allowing herself a small smile that had preceded victory in countless, seemingly impossible situations. The more thoroughly they search, the more resources they commit, the more exposed they become to federal documentation. The night deepened over Silver Peak as Katherine observed more subtle changes in the town's atmosphere. Richard's teams had established their initial positions, but their growing frustration was evident in increasingly aggressive information-gathering attempts. "They're getting nervous," she noted, watching another casual passerby make their third circuit past the saloon. "Your scheduled check-in time has passed, and they can't locate you through normal channels." Raven nodded grimly, his professional experience allowing him to read the signs. Richards won't like the lack of clear intelligence. He's used to having complete information before committing his main force. Through the rain-streaked windows, more signals flickered between the organization's observation points. Lamps moved in specific patterns. Supposedly ordinary citizens exchanged coded greetings, each movement carrying hidden meaning that Katherine had learned to interpret during her years of hunting bounties. "Their search patterns are becoming more focused," Martinez observed, his tactical knowledge evident as he tracked the movements. "They're systematically eliminating possible locations, narrowing down where we might be holding their captured men." Sarah coordinated with her deputies, ensuring every federal agent maintained their positions without drawing attention. "How long before Richards decides he has to take direct action?" she asked, though her tone suggested she'd already calculated the timeline. "He'll give his advance teams another hour," Wilson replied, professional assessment precise. "Standard. Protocol allows for communication delays, equipment failures, ordinary disruptions. After that." Quick pause, friends. If you're enjoying this tale of mounting tension, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals a strategy that will leave you breathless. Katherine moved to check another of her carefully prepared defensive positions, each one designed not just for protection, but to channel their opponent's actions in specific directions. "And when that hour passes without contact," she prompted. "That's when it gets interesting," Raven explained, his tactical mind reconstructing likely scenarios. "Richards will have to abandon his usual careful approach. The situation's too critical for standard containment protocols." Maria, maintaining her vigilant watch, added her own intelligence. "Our sources indicate he's become increasingly paranoid about federal infiltration. Any suggestion that his primary enforcement arm has been compromised will force him to take personal control of the operation." Through the gathering darkness, Katherine caught glimpses of more federal marshals taking their positions throughout Silver Peak. Each one had been carefully chosen and placed over months of preparation, their presence concealed from the organization's local informants. "Your employers built their empire on appearing untouchable," she mused, watching another of Richard's teams establish themselves at a strategic intersection, on maintaining distance between their leadership and any direct criminal activities. "Tonight, we force them to abandon that distance." Sarah studied the town's layout, marking potential observation points and approaches. His military background will influence his tactical choices. He'll want clear lines of sight, multiple escape routes, the ability to coordinate different teams simultaneously. "But that same military training creates predictability," Katherine observed, moving to activate another set of her carefully prepared mechanisms throughout the saloon. "He'll follow certain protocols, expect specific responses to his actions. That's what we'll use against him." Thunder rolled overhead as more of Richard's men arrived in Silver Peak. Each new group maintained careful cover as ordinary travelers, but their movements betrayed professional training to Katherine's experienced eye. "They're establishing secondary positions," Martinez noted, tracking the pattern of deployments, "creating fallback points, securing potential escape routes, standard military doctrine adapted for civilian territory." Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had preceded victory in countless seemingly impossible situations. And every position they establish, every move they make, creates more evidence for federal prosecutors to use. They're so focused on containing us that they don't realize they're exposing themselves. The storm's intensity increased as midnight approached, matching the growing tension in Silver Peak. Katherine watched through rain-streaked windows as Richards advanced. Teams grew increasingly agitated by their inability to locate their missing enforcement arm. "They're abandoning subtle methods," she observed, noting how the organization's operatives had begun conducting more obvious searches. 4 hours without contact from their primary team is forcing them to take risks. Raven studied the movements, with professional assessment, his tactical mind reading the patterns. Richards won't like this. His entire approach depends on maintaining cover, avoiding obvious law enforcement attention. But with each passing hour, the situation becomes more critical. Through the darkness, Sarah's deputies maintained their own careful surveillance, documenting every move the organization's men made, each interaction, every suspicious gathering, all carefully recorded for federal prosecutors to use later. "Their search patterns are becoming desperate," Martinez noted, watching another group of Richards' men conducting an increasingly obvious sweep of the town's eastern section. "They're breaking standard protocols, showing their hand to anyone paying attention." Katherine moved to check another of her defensive preparations, each one designed to shape the coming confrontation. "Tell me about Richard's contingency plans," she prompted. "When his careful approach fails, how does he typically respond?" "That's what makes him dangerous," Wilson replied, professional respect evident in his voice. "He's adaptable. When subtle methods fail, he's willing to escalate dramatically. Better to expose the operation than lose control of a critical situation." Maria, maintaining her vigilant watch from her position, added her own intelligence. "Our sources indicate he's been given extraordinary authority by the organization's leadership. In emergency situations, he can bypass normal chains of command, commit resources without approval." Through the rain-streaked windows, Katherine caught glimpses of more federal marshals taking their positions throughout Silver Peak. Each one had been carefully chosen and placed over months of preparation, their presence still undetected by the organization's increasingly frantic observers. "The next hour is critical," Sarah commented, coordinating with her deputies through predetermined signals. "When their midnight check-in fails to arrive, Richards will have to assume the worst. That's when we'll see their real response." "He'll have no choice," Raven confirmed, his tactical mind reconstructing likely scenarios. "The organization's entire operation in this territory could be compromised. He'll have to take direct action, expose himself in ways they've carefully avoided until now." Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had preceded victory in countless seemingly impossible situations. "And that's exactly what we're counting on. The more desperate they become, the more evidence they create for federal prosecutors to use." Thunder crashed overhead as more of Richard's men arrived in Silver Peak. Each new group maintained less careful cover than their predecessors, their movements betraying increasing urgency to Katherine's experienced eye. "Their perimeter is nearly complete," Martinez observed, tracking the pattern of deployments. "But they're positioned for offensive action now, not just observation. They're preparing for a direct assault." "Standard military doctrine," Wilson added, his professional knowledge evident. "When containment fails, switch to aggressive response. Clear buildings systematically, secure potential targets, eliminate any possible resistance." Katherine moved, to activate another set of her carefully prepared mechanisms throughout the saloon. Each one had been designed not just for defense, but to channel their opponent's actions in specific directions. Your employers built their power on appearing legitimate, she mused, watching another of Richard's teams take position at a strategic intersection, on maintaining plausible deniability between their leadership and any criminal activities. Tonight, we force them to abandon that pretense. Sarah studied the town's layout, marking potential assault points and approaches. His military background will make him predictable in some ways. He'll want to control key intersections, establish clear fields of fire, maintain multiple attack routes. But that same training creates vulnerability, Katherine observed, moving. To check her defensive positions one final time, he'll expect us to respond according to standard tactical doctrine. He won't anticipate how thoroughly we've prepared for this moment. As midnight struck, the change in the organization's operations became dramatically apparent. Through the rain-streaked windows, Katherine observed Richard's men abandoning their pretense of casual observation, moving with obvious military precision to secure key positions throughout Silver Peak. "There it is," she said softly, watching. The coordinated movements. 5 hours without contact from their primary team. They're shifting to direct action protocols. Raven nodded grimly, his professional experience allowing him to read the tactical shifts. Richards won't wait any longer. The risk of compromised operations across 3 territories will force him to take immediate action. Sarah coordinated with her deputies through predetermined signals, ensuring every federal agent maintained position while documenting the organization's increasingly overt activities. Each movement, every interaction, carefully recorded for future prosecution. "Their perimeter is transforming," Martinez observed, his tactical knowledge evident as he tracked the pattern changes. No longer focused on observation, they're establishing assault positions, preparing for aggressive action. Through the darkness, Katherine caught glimpses of more organization operatives arriving, their movements betraying military training despite civilian clothing. Each new group took position with practiced efficiency, creating overlapping fields of fire around potential target locations. "How long until Richards himself arrives?" she asked, though her tone suggested she'd already calculated the timeline. "Given their current escalation," Wilson replied, professional assessment precise, "he's probably already en route. Standard response time from their compound is 3 hours, but he'll push harder in critical situations." Maria, maintaining her vigilant watch, added her own intelligence. "Our sources spotted heavy rider movement along the North Road. Multiple groups moving fast despite the weather. They're not bothering to maintain cover anymore." Quick pause. "Friends, if you're enjoying this tale of mounting tension, hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals a confrontation that will leave you breathless." Katherine moved to activate another set of her carefully prepared defensive mechanisms throughout the saloon. Each one had been designed not just for protection, but to force their opponents into specific approaches that federal agents could properly document. "Tell me about Richard's assault protocols," she prompted, checking firing angles and positions. "When he abandons subtle methods, how does he typically proceed?" "Three-phase operation," Raven explained, his tactical mind reconstructing likely scenarios. "First, establish complete perimeter control. Second, conduct systematic building-by-building search using coordinated teams. Third, converge on confirmed target location with overwhelming force." "But he's operating blind," Sarah observed, satisfaction evident in her voice. "No confirmation of our actual position, no intelligence about our capabilities, no time to conduct proper reconnaissance." Thunder crashed overhead as more of Richard's men arrived in Silver Peak. Their movements showed increasing urgency, professional discipline strained by the critical nature of their situation. "They'll start building searches soon," Martinez warned, tracking the deployment patterns, working outward from central locations, clearing structures systematically. Standard military sweep expanded for civilian territory. Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had preceded victory in countless seemingly impossible situations. "Let them search," she said softly. "Every building they clear, every door they break down, creates more evidence of their direct involvement in criminal activities. The organization won't be able to maintain deniability," Wilson realized, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Can't explain away military-style operations conducted by their security forces in a civilian town." Through the rain-streaked windows, Katherine observed the first search teams moving into position. Each group maintained professional coordination, but their actions were now openly militant, impossible to disguise as normal civilian activity. "Your employer's entire power structure depends on appearing legitimate," she mused, watching another team prepare to breach a nearby building, on maintaining distance between their leadership and any provable criminal acts. "Tonight, we force them to abandon that fiction." The first building search began at precisely midnight, Richards's men breaching the Silver Star Hotel with military precision. Through the rain-streaked windows, Katherine watched as more teams prepared to systematically clear every structure in Silver Peak. "They're starting with locations that offer strategic advantage," she observed, noting how the search pattern focused on taller buildings with clear lines of sight, following standard military doctrine for urban operations. Raven studied their movements with professional assessment, his tactical knowledge allowing him to read their intentions. "First phase is almost complete. They've established perimeter control, positioned response teams. Now they'll clear structures methodically until they find us." Sarah coordinated silently with her deputies, ensuring every federal agent maintained position while documenting the organization's increasingly aggressive activities. Each breach, every search, carefully recorded as evidence of direct criminal action. "Their discipline is starting to crack," Martinez noted, watching another team break down a door without bothering to maintain any pretense of legitimate authority. "The time pressure is forcing them to abandon standard protocols." Through the darkness, Katherine caught glimpses of more riders arriving from the North Road. Their approach was direct now, no longer attempting to conceal their numbers or intentions. The organization had committed fully to aggressive action. "Richards will be with that group," Wilson said, his professional experience evident in his assessment. "He won't trust subordinates to handle something this critical, not when the entire territorial operation could be compromised." Maria, maintaining her vigilant watch, added her own intelligence. "Our sources confirm at least 30 more men approaching from the north. Heavy weapons, military equipment. They're not even trying to disguise their nature anymore." Quick pause, dear viewers. If you're enjoying this tale of escalating tension, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's episode reveals a moment that changes everything. Katherine moved to check her final defensive preparations, each mechanism and position carefully designed for what was coming. "Tell me about Richard's personal tactics," she prompted. "When he takes direct control of an operation, how does he typically proceed?" He leads from the front," Raven replied, his tactical mind reconstructing likely scenarios. "Coordinates multiple teams personally, maintains direct communication through predetermined signals, prefers to assess situations himself rather than rely on subordinate reports." Thunder crashed overhead as more of the organization's men began their systematic search of Silver Peak. Each team moved with military precision, but their actions were now openly aggressive, creating exactly the kind of evidence federal prosecutors needed. "They'll reach the saloon soon," Sarah observed, satisfaction evident in her voice despite the mounting tension. "Every move they make, every building they breach, adds to our documentation of their criminal activities." Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had preceded victory in countless seemingly impossible situations. "Let them come," she said softly. "The more aggressive their response, the more completely they expose themselves to federal prosecution." Through the rain-streaked windows, she observed another team preparing to breach a nearby building. Their movements were professional, but increasingly urgent, tactical discipline strained by the critical nature of their mission. "The organization won't survive this," Wilson realized, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Even if they find us, even if they somehow contain the situation, they can't explain away this kind of military operation in a civilian town." "That's exactly what we're counting on," Katherine confirmed, watching as more of Richard's men arrived in Silver Peak. "Sometimes the most effective trap isn't about direct confrontation. It's about forcing your opponent to destroy themselves." "Deal." The sound of splintering wood echoed through the night as another door was broken down. Another building searched with increasingly desperate thoroughness. Each action moved them closer to the saloon, closer to the confrontation Katherine had spent months preparing for. "Richards will be here soon," Martinez warned, his tactical knowledge evident in his assessment. "When he arrives, when he takes personal control of the operation." That's when we spring the final trap," Katherine finished, her hand brushing one of her carefully concealed weapons. "When the organization's leadership exposes themselves completely, proves their direct involvement in criminal activities beyond any possibility of denial." "Itin." The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the storm's fury as Colonel James Richards finally arrived in Silver Peak. Katherine observed his entrance through the rain-streaked windows, noting how his mere presence transformed the organization's operations. "There he is," she said softly, watching the military precision with which his personal guard established positions around him. The organization's master of crisis response, finally showing himself openly. Raven tensed visibly at Richard's arrival, his professional experience allowing him to read the subtle shifts in the operation's tempo. "He'll take direct control now. Every team, every movement will be personally coordinated through him." Through the darkness, Katherine studied Richard's appearance with careful assessment. He cut an imposing figure, his military bearing evident despite civilian clothing. Each movement spoke of command experience and absolute authority. "His tactical approach is changing already," Martinez observed, watching how the search teams immediately adjusted their patterns. More aggressive, more coordinated. He won't waste time with methodical building-by-building clearing anymore. Sarah coordinated silently with her deputies, ensuring every federal agent maintained position while documenting Richards's personal involvement. His presence proved direct connection between the organization's leadership and their criminal activities. "Tell me about his command style," Katherine prompted, though her tone suggested she'd already analyzed his methods. "When he takes personal control of an operation, how does he typically proceed?" "Complete tactical dominance," Wilson replied, professional assessment precise. "He'll establish a central command position, coordinate multiple teams simultaneously, maintain direct oversight of every aspect of the operation." Maria, maintaining her vigilant watch, added her own intelligence. "Our sources indicate he's been given total authority by the organization's leadership. In critical situations, he can commit whatever resources necessary without consultation." Through the rain-streaked windows, Katherine observed how Richard's presence energized his men. Each team moved with renewed purpose, their actions now openly militant as they converged on potential target locations. "He's establishing his command center in the hotel," Raven noted, tracking the pattern of movements. "High ground, clear lines of sight, multiple escape routes. Standard military." doctrine adapted for civilian territory. Thunder crashed overhead as more of Richard's personal guard secured key positions throughout Silver Peak. Their movements betrayed extensive military training, creating exactly the kind of evidence federal prosecutors needed to prove organized criminal activity. His reputation for tactical brilliance is well earned, Katherine acknowledged, watching another team take position with perfect precision. But that same brilliance makes him predictable in certain ways. He'll follow military protocols, expect standard responses. Sarah studied Richard's deployment patterns with satisfaction. Every order he gives, every position he establishes, adds to our documentation of the organization's direct involvement in criminal operations. Through the storm's fury, Katherine caught glimpses of Richard's coordinating his forces with practiced efficiency. Each signal, every command, demonstrated his personal control over the operation. "He's preparing for a full assault," Martinez warned, his tactical knowledge evident in his assessment. "Once he confirms our location, he'll commit everything simultaneously, maximum force applied from multiple directions." Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had preceded victory in countless seemingly impossible situations. "Let him prepare," she said softly. "The more thoroughly he coordinates the assault, the more completely he proves the organization's criminal nature." Wilson watched through the windows as more of Richard's men secured positions around the saloon. "They're starting to focus here," he observed. "Other buildings have been cleared, elimination of possibilities leading them to our location." "Your employers chose their crisis commander well," Katherine mused, activating another set of her carefully prepared defensive mechanisms. But they never considered how his military expertise could be used against them, how his precise, coordinated operations would prove their direct involvement in criminal activities. The sound of Richard's voice carried through the night, issuing clear commands that transformed the operation's nature from covert action to open military assault. Each order moved them closer to the confrontation Katherine had spent months preparing for. The storm reached its peak intensity as Richards completed his initial assessment of the situation. From her position in the saloon, Katherine watched how his tactical analysis transformed the scattered search efforts into a coordinated military operation. "He's identified every potential approach," she observed, noting how his teams had established perfect coverage of all routes to the saloon. No standard escape path left uncovered, no tactical advantage unexploited. Raven studied his former commander's deployments with professional assessment. "He's setting up for a comprehensive assault. Multiple teams, synchronized attacks, overwhelming force applied simultaneously from every direction." Through the rain-streaked windows, Katherine caught glimpses of Richards personally inspecting each position, ensuring every team understood their role in the coming operation. His military precision was creating exactly the kind of documented criminal activity federal prosecutors needed. "Their final preparations are almost complete," Martinez noted, his tactical knowledge allowing him to read the patterns. Each team moving into assault positions, establishing clear fields of fire, preparing for coordinated breach actions. Sarah continued coordinating silently with her deputies, ensuring every federal agent maintained position while recording Richards's direct involvement in organizing criminal military activities in civilian territory. "His reputation for thorough preparation is well earned," Katherine acknowledged, checking her own defensive mechanisms one final time. "Every aspect of the assault will be carefully planned, every contingency considered." Wilson watched through the windows as more of Richard's men took their final positions. "They've got at least 40 experienced operators out there now," he assessed, all with military training, all under his direct command. Maria, maintaining her vigilant watch, added her own intelligence. "Our sources indicate this is the largest force he's ever committed to a single operation. The organization must be truly desperate to risk such obvious criminal activity. Quick pause, dear viewers. If you're enjoying this tale of tactical chess, make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's episode reveals the most intricate trap ever sprung. Through the storm's fury, Katherine observed Richards conducting final coordination with his team leaders. Each interaction demonstrated his personal control over the operation, creating irrefutable evidence of organized criminal activity. "He'll begin with a show of force," Raven predicted, his tactical mind reconstructing likely scenarios. "Standard military doctrine: demonstrate overwhelming superiority, offer chance for surrender, then commit to full assault if refused." Thunder crashed overhead as Richard's men completed their preparations. Their movements were now openly militant, any pretense of legitimate activity abandoned in favor of tactical efficiency. The organization's leadership made a critical mistake, Katherine mused, watching another team take position with perfect precision. They chose a commander whose military expertise would prove their criminal nature beyond any doubt. Sarah studied the deployment patterns with satisfaction. "Every order he gives, every position he establishes, adds to our documentation. No court could mistake this for anything but organized criminal military activity." Through the darkness, Katherine caught glimpses of Richards making final adjustments to his assault team's positions. His personal attention to every detail would make his direct involvement impossible to deny. "He's almost ready," Martinez warned, his tactical knowledge evident in his assessment. "Once he's satisfied with the preparations, he'll launch the assault without warning. Maximum impact, minimal response time." Katherine allowed herself a small smile, one that had preceded victory in countless seemingly impossible situations. "Let him prepare thoroughly," she said softly. "The more complete his military operation, the more damning the evidence against his employers." Wilson observed the final positioning of Richard's forces around the saloon. "They've got us completely surrounded," he noted. "Every angle covered, every approach controlled. Textbook military containment." "Your employers built their power on plausible deniability," Katherine commented, activating her final defensive preparations. "On maintaining distance from any provable criminal activity. Tonight, their chosen commander destroys that deniability with military precision." The sound of Richard's final commands carried through the night, transforming the operation from covert action to unmistakable military assault. Each order brought them closer to the confrontation Katherine had spent months preparing for. Lightning illuminated Silver Peak as Colonel Richards emerged into the street before the saloon, his military bearing unmistakable despite the civilian clothing. Katherine watched through the rain-streaked windows as he personally assessed the target one. "Final time. Right on schedule," she said softly, noting how his presence drew his men to even sharper attention. "The organization's master of crisis response, about to spring our trap with perfect military precision." Through the storm's fury, Richards' voice carried clearly, trained to command over battlefield chaos. "This is Colonel Richards. We have the building completely surrounded. Surrender now and we can discuss terms. Resist and we'll take appropriate action." Sarah exchanged significant looks with Katherine, both women noting how his words proved direct connection between military operation and criminal organization. Every statement added to their evidence for federal prosecution. "He's offering terms first," Raven observed, professional assessment precise. "Standard military protocol, demonstrate overwhelming force, offer chance to surrender, then commit to full assault if refused." Katherine moved to her final position, each movement calculated for what would come next. "Tell me, Colonel," she called back, her voice carrying clearly through the storm. "Did your employers authorize you to conduct military operations in civilian territory, or did they maintain their usual distance from criminal activities?" Thunder crashed as Richards processed her implication. Through the windows, Katherine caught the subtle shift in his bearing that indicated understanding dawning. "You've been playing a longer game than simple bounty hunting," he replied, genuine respect entering his voice. "Using my tactical responses against the organization itself, creating situations that force direct criminal action. The Ghost earned her reputation through strategy as much as skill," Katherine confirmed, "though I suspect your employers will be particularly interested in how their crisis commander provided federal prosecutors with irrefutable evidence of criminal military operations." Maria maintained her vigilant coverage while adding her own observation. "Every federal agent in position, sir. All of Richard's actions fully documented. The organization's direct involvement in criminal activities proven beyond any legal challenge." Through the rain-streaked windows, Katherine watched, understanding transform Richard's tactical assessment. His military training allowed him to recognize how completely he'd been maneuvered into creating evidence against his employers. "Well played," he acknowledged, professional respect evident despite the situation. "Using my own protocols against the organization, forcing us to conduct obvious military operations that prove criminal intent. Your employers built their power on appearing legitimate," Katherine replied, "on maintaining distance from any provable criminal activities. Tonight, their chosen commander provided federal prosecutors with everything they needed. Sarah's deputies maintained their positions, documenting every aspect of the operation. Each order, every deployment, carefully recorded as evidence of organized criminal activity. The organization won't survive this," Richards concluded, his tactical mind assessing the broader implications. "Even if we somehow contained the situation. Now, the evidence of military operations in civilian territory makes their criminal nature impossible to deny," Katherine finished. "Sometimes the most effective strategy isn't about direct confrontation. It's about letting your opponent destroy themselves through their own actions." Lightning flashed again as Richards made his final decision. Years of military experience had taught him to recognize when situations shifted beyond recovery. With deliberate precision, he removed his weapon and placed it on the ground. "Stand down," he ordered his men, command voice carrying through the storm. "The operation is compromised. The Ghost hasn't just outmaneuvered us, she's forced us to prove the organization's criminal nature through our own tactical protocols." Thunder rolled across Silver Peak as federal marshals emerged from their positions, moving to secure Richards and his men. The organization's careful facade of legitimacy had finally been shattered, broken by their own commander's military precision. "Sometimes," Katherine reflected, watching as Sarah's deputies began processing their prisoners, "the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the most forces or the best tactical position. Sometimes it's the one who understands how to turn an opponent's strength into their greatest vulnerability." The storm began to pass as dawn approached, its fury diminishing like the organization's power. Through carefully manipulated circumstances, the Ghost had forced them to destroy their own carefully maintained deniability, using military precision to prove criminal intent. "Justice," Katherine mused, watching federal marshals lead Richards away, sometimes required more than just skill with weapons. Sometimes it required understanding how to make your opponents defeat themselves through their own actions. The legend of the Ghost would grow again, but not for gunfighting prowess. This time, the story would tell of how she outmaneuvered an entire criminal organization, using their own tactical commander's military precision to prove their criminal nature beyond any doubt. Sometimes, after all, The most effective legends were built on strategy rather than force, on understanding rather than confrontation, on letting your opponents spring the trap themselves through their own predictable actions. Dawn broke over Silver Peak. As the last prisoners were secured, justice finally reaching those who had thought themselves untouchable through their careful manipulation of law and power. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.